The views and opinions expressed on Coffee and Compatibility are those of the podcast host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of ASHI.
I am Eric Weimer, and with me, as always, is the ever-lovely, not purple-faced, Dr. Kelly Hitchman, and Jeremy Sherrill. It's hard to believe we've been doing this now for a number of years, and we've been doing this for 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
So of course this is being recorded for posterity. So for
Of course.
those who may
Or
be
blackmail.
listening and not with us live today, which is a darn shame and we miss you, we are Coffee and Compatibility and we are live. I would be wrong to not start this amazing live episode by just right off the bat thanking our glorious, fantastic, wonderful, perfect, in every way, executive producer. I don't even have to say her name. She knows what I'm talking about.
Come on,
Gloria. The magic behind the whole show.
Doesn't happen without
So for those listening, we are coming to you live from the Marriott in Anaheim, California at ASHI's 50th anniversary meeting. What an amazing meeting it has been. Fantastic time. Do you guys have any favorite moments?
Oh, mine is very easy. It was when you got up here as Ursula and you as Prince Eric. That was clearly the best moment of the meeting. It was like the rest was great.
It was a moment.
The rest was great, but
I still haven't had any additional offers to collaborate on science since then.
No, there's a...
I'm slightly worried about being typecast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a significant chance that it'll just be you and I collaborating.
Yes, we can collaborate together. I did get an offer from
Together,
Welch's
and we can
grape
survive.
company to be in a commercial about some juice, but nothing other than that.
Okay.
what's ironic is Prince Eric and Ursula most definitely did not collaborate in that movie. I saw that movie.
I'm glad you did, because we've had these conversations.
Yeah.
You have to, it's a requirement to be on the podcast that you have watched a certain number of Disney, Marvel, there's quizzes involved, and Kelly did not pass.
I was going to say it's not true. Because
She
I
failed.
think if you've listened to the podcast, which, wait a minute, now let's get to that.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Hopefully you have been listening to the podcast. Have you guys been regularly listening to the podcast? Yeah,
Thank you for clapping, even if you're not.
Thank you. Right. We hope that you regularly listen to the podcast. It's a good bite-sized show, great for a morning commute until you get paged during your morning commute, and then you have to, just get to where you're going safely. Okay, we were having some discussions about this earlier. People trying to do virtuals from their car. Don't do that.
Oh my.
But do listen to Coffee and Compatibility in your car. It's a good family show. Good family show. We've had a lot of great memories on this show over the last 4 years. We have a really interesting lineup for you today. How many of you, I just kind of wonder, have felt a little angsty this year about legislative intervention in our field? Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
good.
I should see more hands. I don't know if this is long.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good, because I want you to let you know that we're going to talk about this today, and we have a mic right in the middle of the room. And so I think 2025 for the podcast is going to be the year of the dear listener, but we would like to start that off today by just kind of telling you, if you want to come up to that mic at any time during the podcast, you feel free to do so. We will certainly have a Q&A session for our T segment later in the episode, where we're going to almost forcibly ask you to come up to the mic. But don't feel like you have to hold your questions. If you have something burning, get up there. We will address it. Okay? All right.
Should we do it?
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
let's take our seats and get started.
Let's do this.
All right. So We have some really exciting guests for you today. I would like to welcome to the stage two amazing folks that are going to help us start to unpack the last year in legislative action in our area. So our first guest of the morning is Dr. Annette Jackson, who is a professor in the departments of surgery and immunology at Duke University and serves as chief of clinical transplantation immunology research, and deep breath, is the director in clinical transplantation immunology in their lab. So Dr. Jackson is going to join us on the stage. And of course, Dr. Jackson is a recent past ASHI president and a fantastic guest on the podcast. So thank you, Dr. Jackson, for being with us this morning. We appreciate you.
Please.
Be comfy. Be comfy. Tell us how. Is the couch good? Is it stiff? Is it bouncy?
A little stiff.
Good. Oh, okay. All right.
But just being up here is so intimidating. So.
Right? Right. Okay. Great. We'll make you feel at home. Our second guest, I think Jeremy is going to introduce. We're really excited.
We are very happy to welcome Rebecca Upchurch. Rebecca has 16 years of experience in histocompatibility, is currently the laboratory supervisor at University of Chicago Medicine, overseeing operations for transplant support and immunogenetic testing. She holds multiple degrees, including a master's in public affairs, is skilled in data analysis, teaching, and public policy. Rebecca is also a member of ASHI. She's written for ASHI Quarterly and served on multiple committees, including Technologist Affairs and the Public Policy Task Force, and is all around just a rock star in the HLA world. Rebecca, welcome to Coffee and Compatibility.
Awesome. Let's welcome our guest this morning.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Get comfortable. So I think you both know that we invited you here because it's been kind of a dramatic year this year. Lots of ups and downs with regard to where histocompatibility and immunogenetics stands, even where broader clinical laboratory issues stand from a governmental perspective, especially here in the U.S. So we've had new FDA regulations, we've had the VALID Act, we've had CLIA and CMS updates. So what I'd like to do today is kind of unpack all that. So maybe that's a lot.
We only got 20 minutes.
Right.
We got to go to the next one.
No, we're going to go through all of it.
We're just going to talk about it all today. So maybe let's start with maybe one of the things that we've been talking about back and forth for the longest, and that's the VALID Act. And we invited Dr. Jackson and Rebecca here, and maybe call you Annette and Rebecca. Yes. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. So we invited Annette and Rebecca here because they have such extensive experience. Annette, from a board perspective, Rebecca's definitely a new member of our board, so she's going to get that perspective too. But also from their service on the National Clinical Affairs Committee within ASHI, that helps with our government relations and our government relations institution, Wheat, Schroyer and Associates on the Hill. So they have been, kind of boots on the ground, helping ASHI navigate this, these times. So let's talk about the VALID Act first. Can either or both of you ladies kind of just remind us very briefly what the VALID Act was seeking to accomplish?
So this was Congress's way. Well, as I presented in the Director's Affairs, laboratory developed tests are getting much more complex, and there was a feeling from Congress that there needed to be some regulatory oversight of LDTs. We all are aware of the Theranos debacle, where they were doing molecular testing and that CEO went to jail. It's that type of horror that they're trying to avoid. And CLIA did not keep the public safe from that company. And so Congress decided to move it. Senator Burr was the main writer of that legislature. And unfortunately, the FDA had made a bunch of missteps in 2023, and the Valid Act did not pass, but it would put FDA over high complexity laboratories. Whereas before we were overseen by CMS, there would be this diagonal line in which FDA would always also have some oversight. So that didn't pass, and we all went, whoosh. But the FDA was bound, they were determined to get some kind of regulatory oversight. So they went to the executive branch and put through a final rule. And ASHI the entire time was intervening and talking to staff members from all the writers of the Valid Act. And finally, we had a conversation with the White House, and we got the carve-out that we have in the current final rule. But it's only a partial carve-out, I realize. It's got to do with HLA testing in relation to stem cell and solid organ transplant. And I may not have been clear at the Director's Affairs, but now the final rule is under lawsuit. There are 3 lawsuits. I just heard yesterday that CAP has also filed a lawsuit. And Congress is getting busy coming up with kind of a valid 2.0. So even though there's all this turmoil and things are not passing and there's lawsuits, this type of oversight is coming. And I don't think it's altogether bad. I mean, you have to agree that companies like Theranos cannot operate and put the public at risk.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the FDA and all these even exist, right, as sort of providing some larger overstructure to the system. If I may, Rebecca, I'd like to get your thoughts on how, any sort of government regulation, how that you see that impacting sort of MLSs specifically, right? Because we often approach this, and I've heard Dr. Jackson talk about this before, right, from like the big laboratory perspective or director's point of view on it. But I'd really love to hear your thoughts on how like you and your colleagues are thinking about it and what it means to you.
Right, so I think a lot of technical staff, boots on the ground staff, they're just not aware of what's happening. And a comment I like to make is, HLA is already complicated as it is. Now you want to factor in legislation and throw out all of these acronyms that make zero sense. Don't ask a technologist to read the legislation on it. It's not going to make any sense whatsoever. So they're looking to the leaders for guidance on this. They're looking to their supervisors, the managers, the directors, to the community to really guide us as we approach these more difficult conversations and how our labs move forward.
It makes me think that perhaps we should do like a ASHI quarterly with like what has happened and what all those acronyms are. And then I would like more conversation with the community. Many of you work at large academic institutions, and you have a lot of big leaders that may be at the seat of the table in some of these conversations. And so really understanding, we all need to get ready, and I would review what LDTs you have in your lab. Many of our reagents now are FDA approved. Many of us do not follow the package insert, and so that makes it an LDT.
Who does follow the package insert?
Anybody? Actually, that's a great audience poll. Raise your hand if you follow every package insert for a manufacturer product that you use in your lab.
We have one hand up, and I bet you work in a blood bank.
Which is fantastic, and we're glad you're here.
So, Annette, what can labs do to be prepared? Do they need to do anything to be prepared?
I think you need to talk to your pathology chair. If you're in pathology, if you're not in pathology, you need to talk to pathology. And we need to start getting our ducks in a row. Did you cut out a wash, and is it really necessary to not follow the package insert? I would evaluate that. I mean, some of it's just laboratory drift.
Yeah.
That being said, we've had arguments about whether serum treatment nullifies.
Means that it's an LDT.
Yeah.
That is a fascinating question.
Yeah. And so I think we can start gathering these questions that we have that are applicable across labs to really dig into that. I think we can have a conversation of what type of validation the FDA would want to see. You know, if it comes, it is coming. It is coming, and so we need to prepare. We can't just do nothing and then have a new Valid Act come up.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think that this is an opportunity where, you know, the community is so collaborative, right? Like all of you here and listening are, you know, we've been such a strong community for so long, right? 50 years of the annual meeting as a society, right? And this is an opportunity for us to lead, right? Like this is not a wait and see what someone comes down and tells us moment. This is a get ahead of it moment. And so I would encourage you all to talk with, you know, community leaders, the different committee members, so we can form this as a unit to stay ahead of any additional regulation that's coming. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was just going to say, would it be useful if we kind of summarize this in an ASHI quarterly to just talk about the acronyms and then perhaps talk to some of the large centers to see how are you preparing? Like what steps are you taking? Just to kind of share different approaches.
Yeah, I would vote for that. And here's why. Because I think there are so many overlapping legislative actions and processes. Like I'm still trying to unpack. So Annette, from what you said, and my understanding of this is, the Valid Act was seeking to regulate all high complexity testing, but that didn't work. But they were able to get a piece through in that they started regulating laboratory developed tests.
Nope, laboratory developed tests was the purpose of Valid at the beginning. So it's always been.
It has always just been
yes.
LDTs.
Because FDA approved tests have gone through this process of FDA approval. LDTs have been hanging out on the side, and they are getting complex. They're molecular, they're high sequencing, there's high analytical software. And no one, at ASHI, we've always been ahead of the game, and this was told to me by a CAP leader. When we bring on NGS, we actually do a validation, and we submit it to ASHI for an external validation. And I'm told that's not done in CAP labs. And so correct. You guys have actually, are much more knowledgeable than you think, because the setup of an external validation is kind of what the FDA is seeking. We're very concerned, and this was part of our conversation with the White House, that this additional administration, because more or less, it's like we know what companies do to get an FDA-approved reagent, and they're asking labs, if you have an LDT, that's like a new invention, and they want to see it go through FDA approval.
Which is at a huge cost, right? I mean,
yeah,
cost,
we don't know anything about
time.
that, but it's administrative cost, and I'm sure there'll be a charge for the FDA. And some say there might be monetary motivation by the FDA. That is just hearsay, but you can imagine that could be true.
Well, and who would look at these validations and
right.
determine whether or not they are, not to keep using the word valid, but to continue using the word valid.
To Rebecca's point earlier, we really need to be in really close communication as whole laboratory teams, because the technologists, as we perform these validations, if we have to do new validations, those don't happen overnight.
No.
Those need to be, we need to have a plan, a timetable to get all of that done.
Yeah. I just have a comment. Outside of ASHI, I have talked to several people involved in other scientific organizations where they're taking a wait-and-see approach. They're hoping that this ongoing litigation actually dissolves this.
Ooh.
And one thing I really love about all of the groundwork we've put forth is I think we are preparing ourselves for what is coming. I don't think we need to disadvantage ourselves by thinking, the litigation from, CAP, ACLA, AMP, is going to strike this down. And I think within ASHI, we have the expertise needed for the testing we do. One major concern is does the FDA have that expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this brings us to a good point because I want the audience to understand, I think it's very understandable how Annette's experience lends itself to these White House discussions, being very involved on the NCAC as past, ASHI president, as a member of the board. But I want the audience to understand the unique purview that Rebecca has had here. So you have been, as a technologist leader member in ASHI, you've had a really unique position on the NCAC. You weren't just part of the NCAC, you were our first cohort with Dr. Mary Philogene as an NCAC scholar. So this puts you in a really unique position to contact these issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I want folks in the audience to understand that is the thing, and what that brings to ASHI and what that has brought to you.
And can you introduce Wheaton Schroyer? Feel like they don't know.
Yeah, so thank you, Kelly. So yes, I am a public policy scholar along with Dr. Philogene. And, we were onboarded onto NCAC in these positions, and, it was a first for me to actually learn what ASHI is doing from a public policy perspective. Now, many of you don't know ASHI does work very closely with a law firm, Wheaton Schroyer, where we do get, our legal counsel, our legal advice. And, they have been very proactive with us on Capitol Hill in trying to navigate all of these complicated issues. And, not only has it been great to work with all of the leaders of ASHI, we've really been pushed to get this outreach out there. I've sat in on calls with some of, the representing bodies from the Senate, our governors, outreach to just members of Congress within our relative, districts and regions to really share with them what the impact of this legislation really means on us as a field, but patients, right? Because ultimately everything that we are doing affects the patients. And many people in government, in legislation, have no idea we exist. They have no idea the amount of regulation that we are currently under. So I think it's really eye-opening. And I'm going to go ahead and put a plug out there. We need to be in contact with all of our government officials. This is how we get the word out. This is how we really share our concerns. And I think it's really important for us. And I know government is big and scary. Nobody understands it. I mean, I understand, such a tiny, tiny percentage of it. But it's really opened the door to conversations that have allowed us to get to the place we are today.
And there is a mechanism for that, right? I think, I certainly have reached out to my representatives about this, but it's not something that I do every day. And maybe it's not something that you guys do every day or that you feel like you know how to do. And thank goodness ASHI has great advice on the Hill from professionals that interact with our leaders in Congress and in government for a living, and that is Wheat Schroyer and Associates. So do you feel like that involvement between Wheat Schroyer and Associates and ASHI has been valuable in giving the community an outlet on the Hill? Like that helps give us some preparedness, some guidance on how to do this?
I absolutely do. And, I think without that guidance, we would not be where we are today.
So really quickly, in the last time that we have, another big change that has been discussed a lot and is extremely controversial are some of these, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I'm going to call some of them kind of surprise changes that were made by CLIA and CMS in December of 2023. These things were announced and proposed. And so I think the most controversial part of this are the changes that this has made to who may or may not qualify to direct CLIA-based HLA laboratories in the United States. So tell us what the latest chatter through NCAC has been on this front. I just kind of want to be clear on what ASHI has been reaching out to CLIA and CMS on versus what ASHI is hearing back from CMS and CLIA, because I think that a lot of these policies officially go into place December 28th of this year, which is right around the corner.
Yeah, Chantel has been leading that effort.
And doing a great job.
The document was, in my opinion, very confusing and vague. And so she presented at the Directors Affairs Committee the questions that they have sent back to CMS. They're reaching out to CMS regularly for the guidance. There's a guidance document that supposedly is going to clarify the very ambiguous language that came out in the CMS update. And we do not know when that will be, but they promise it'll be by the end of the year. And I think at this point, we kind of think it might come out the day before the end of the year.
I mean, there's no telling, right?
And it was, my understanding from both CMS and FDA is that they kind of want one path, one set of rules. And when we were speaking with people, when the VALID Act was up and running, they more or less said they do not want carve-outs for specialties. They don't want, and so the fact that we got the carve-out on the final rule, I think it was basically because of the cross-match test, because you cannot FDA approve a cross-match test. However, I was speaking with Maria Batnati yesterday, and we are using the cross-match test less. We also got pushed through the virtual cross-match allowance within the CMS. So we can't have our cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
And so that's why I do believe we need to be ready and get our validations up to snuff and just be more and more prepared as these things roll out. Wheaton Schroyer also represents other societies such as AMP, and so they always bring us new chatter on the Hill, new sessions, meetings for us to listen in on. They get us meetings when we want to discuss this directly with people. Our hiring of Wheaton Schroyer is really so that we can be proactive and less reactive. And the development of scholars is to find people in our society who are interested in policy and bring them in to work closely with Wheaton Schroyer, because we need more people. I thank many of you, as I was NCAC chair, many of you would email me things that you were hearing through CAP, through AMP, and that's very helpful to see how the other societies, what they're thinking, what they're putting in their newsletter. So we need to keep this active dialogue, as Rebecca said.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your insights and efforts in coming on the show with us today.
Thank you. Don't go far. We'll bring you back for the tea. Thank you so much. We got the swag.
Hey, Coffee and Compatibility fans. As a token of our appreciation, we're giving you 10% off your entire purchase at the ASHI store from now until December 31st, 2024. Just use the code WITTYBANTER, that's all caps, no spaces, WITTYBANTER at the checkout, and get your hands on some fantastic ASHI gear. Thank you for all your support and loyalty. Head to the ASHI store today and enjoy your discount. Offer ends December 31st, so don't wait.
Now, we would like to quickly make a little segue and announce the winners of the President's Choice and People's Choice posters.
I need a drum. Oh, no, I'm not doing it.
Do you want to feel like I'm dominating?
He gave me the hardest. No.
Here we go.
Okay. The President's Choice winner this year is Adoya Gimferrer. Where are you? Congratulations, madam. We are very proud of you. And we have another winner, the People's Choice winner, I believe.
Who is it,
All
Jeremy?
right, People's Choice Award winner is Drum roll, please. I feel like there should be more anticipation. Arles Kualo from UCSF. Arles, where are you? Is Arles here today?
Is with us? No, but we are also very happy for you, very proud of you.
Yes, congratulations.
Your checks are in the mail.
And you can look up that poster. That's poster P212. You can look that up in the app and see the poster.
Congratulations to the winners. So now we have a very different purview for you this morning. Dr. Ann Halpin needs no introduction. She is your ASHI president-elect, but she is an associate professor and director at the Edmonton Histocompatibility.
Hello, this is Lyndon Galt, and you're listening to ASHI's Coffee and Compatibility
Laboratories. She holds a PhD from the University of Alberta and a med science degree from Trinity College in Dublin, and has worked in HLA labs in Alberta and Texas, serving in many ASHI roles, as many of you have collaborated with her, I'm sure. She's your president-elect. She's an expert in living donation from both a personal and professional perspective, I might add. All the important things. And an expert in ABO histocompatibility. So please welcome Dr. Ann Halpin. Who looks fabulous in teal. And she's given us all the comfort cozies this morning. I love this coat. You better watch it, because it's going to disappear if you take it off, and I did not take it if it does. So welcome. Be comfy. Sit with us. So excited to have you.
You got the whole sofa.
You get the
just
spread out.
spread out, have fun.
At this point in the meeting, probably we should all just lay down.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like...
Yeah, do these recline?
They should, actually. That's a good point.
So, Madam President-elect, I hope we can call you Ann.
Yes, please call me Ann.
I like Madam President-elect.
Ann, will you be the first ASHI president that is themselves a living donor?
Well, that's a good, I guess I might be, I think. I mean,
we'll have to
I'm
look
not
that up.
sure. I'd have to fact check that, but maybe.
I think the answer is yes. It's very exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, Ann, we asked you to come on the show today because so many of our labs are in the U.S., but ASHI is an international society with wonderful partners all over the world, certainly outstanding partners such as yourself and Lori West in Canada. And I am very curious to know, as you hear all of this chatter about these FDA regulations, about these CMS and CLIA changes, how do you feel this is perceived in other areas of the world from our professional societal standpoint? What does this kind of chatter make you think about?
Well, I think, Canada, ASHI is our Society for Histocompatibility because we're not a giant country. We don't have, nearly the number of labs that the United States does. So, and I think we've always been very engaged as Canadians within ASHI, serving in lots of different capacities. So when we're inspected or we're going through the standards, there's always a little bit of the, over in the side when it says, CLIA this, CMS that, and we're like, yikes, what does that mean for me? And so this is really shining a spotlight on that and what does that mean for us? And we still don't know because, as you said earlier, we're waiting for, the response to the many, many questions that have been asked. And there's some direct things that really directly affect us. Our training programs, for example, if we have director and training programs in Canada, it looks like at this point in time, that means that this will not be an opportunity for people who are training outside of the US to come and work in the US without additional training in a CLIA lab. And so that is important for us as we bring on new trainees for director and training positions. And so that guidance is really important to us too, from that perspective, because you want to be really transparent bringing someone in to train them. Where will you be able to work? What are your training opportunities? And on the flip side, I think that it's also a challenge for American labs if you want to bring on. There's many excellent directors in training or trained directors in other parts of the world, and maybe this is going to be a challenge to hire those individuals too. And we don't have a lot of extra directors floating around, so that's going to be potentially a problem.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say on that note, there are a lot of technologists who are looking at potentially doing the training, going back to school, doing the training to maybe step into a director role. What advice would you give them in light of the new regulations?
Well, in the US, that's maybe a different answer than in Canada. And actually, I actually worked as a senior technologist in an American lab for a number of years. So I'm not sure even for me what that would specifically mean. Does that count? I don't know. But I think if you're within the US, and we do have, it's a great point because we have quite a few people who have gone through, from a technologist, working different roles in the lab, and then deciding. I like to refer to my PhD as a geriatric PhD because I was not, I did it with a lot of, years under my belt. And I said that to someone once, and they said, "Oh, you studied geriatrics?" I was like, "Oh, I was the geriatric. That was me." But, if you are within Canada, then that would mean, even with all those years of experience, that would still mean 4 additional years because you wouldn't have been training and working in a CLIA lab. And within the United States, maybe if you've been in a senior role, as I understand, I find the wording very confusing, I think, like all of us, but maybe some of that time would count toward that, maybe it wouldn't. I think we're all waiting to find out.
Yeah, I think, thank goodness for meetings like the ASHI annual meeting, for the FE meetings, for the meetings where we get together and collaborate, because I think up until this point, a wonderful way to collaborate has been to bring others from outside maybe of your country to train in your laboratory and not just teach them what you're doing, but learn what they have been doing and what unique skills and novel methods they've been using. And this kind of cuts off that particular pipeline, which is so disappointing and unfortunate. But thank goodness, we still have these meetings here, and that'll continue forward. I'm interested too to know from you. Sometimes we get so focused on what's going on in our, worldview. Do we feel like, have you heard things that, are other countries looking at this and thinking that they should make some changes that might be unfortunate? Or what are some legislative things that go on in Canada or that you're aware of in other countries that keep you up at night with regards to continuing your lab practice in the best way for your staff and your patients?
Yeah, because we are so, actively using ASHI for accreditation and other things, we will be directly impacted by this for sure. We have Health Canada as our, agency where things are, like our FDA equivalent, I suppose. I haven't heard that this is specifically under their, lens at this time, but reality is that changes that happen in, our neighbor's country definitely impact us too. So I think it was said earlier, sort of like, what is happening, what are the next steps? I think that will really depend on what happens at the end of this. And there are a lot of specialties. We're an esoteric area of the lab. We do very specialty testing. Our technologist training is on-the-job training. My dad used to say OJT. It's a lot of OJT. And I think that's true in Canada as well. Our licensing exams for technologists don't include histocompatibility. So, and that's, if you look, maybe genetics and genomics might be another area of the laboratory that has some of these same issues. It's a lot of OJT. Maybe less for call. I think call makes our area of the lab also for technologists, but very, there's some unique aspects to that too, because there you are by yourself at 3 a.m. doing hard things. You can always call a friend, but it's still a lot of pressure. And I think this training is important. We know how to do this. I would hate to think that someone else is, with less expertise in that area would be trying to guide how we do these things. What is, what accounts, what constitutes good training for call, for running these tests, for, that's a great point that was made earlier too. If we're doing serum treatment, if we do a dilution, are we still following the test? Is someone going to tell us that we can't do that? And I hope that doesn't become the case anywhere. But these are big questions.
And so I want to end by asking you do a lot of work in ABO, right? Innovative work in ABO. In connection to what we've been talking about, right? How do you see that impacting not only like the work that you do, but the important part of translating what you're doing into patients, whether it's your center in the U.S., wherever it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's kind of two aspects that just in general, even without, all of this recent what's
you can
the
say
word
shenanigans.
Shenanigans, that's a good word. It speaks to my Irish roots too.
Hullabaloo.
Yeah, hullabaloo. Yeah, kerfuffle. So I think that when we talk about ABO histocompatibility, we may need to disassociate what we do for transfusion versus what we do for transplantation. Because as I said, the other day in one of the sessions, we're never going to put the blood group A unit into the O or B person, but we will put that kidney into that person, and we do it to create equity and access to transplantation for blood groups that are disadvantaged, which also very much is directly related to your ancestry. And so we don't want to be disadvantaging patients. That is always our goal. And as a donor, I think about this too, because if I want, and I think this is, we need to honor in transplantation not just recipients, but donors, and when we're making decisions about allocation and who should get what organs, even if that means crossing the blood group barrier to give someone more access to transplantation, then that's what we should do. And if legislation becomes a barrier to that, that's not what patients want, that's not what donors want, and that's not good for, for our society and transplantation in general. So I think that the ABO piece specifically is going to take some really thoughtful discussion and review, but I do think embracing it as ABO histocompatibility, not for transfusion purposes, may be a good beginning point for discussion, because if we can separate those two buckets, because they are very different, then I think that's maybe a good starting point. But yeah, how that all goes is a great question.
No, I think you had a great answer. So thank you very much for coming on and talking with us today and give us your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're going to ask you to do something a little bit different. I'm going to hand you your token coffee and compatibility notebook and your token coffee and compatibility water bottle and ask you to stay right where you are. You're perfect, because I'm going to invite our other guests, Annette Jackson and Rebecca Upchurch, to come back to the stage, because ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the T. TEA, a segment dedicated to our listeners' questions.
Hello, this is Lyndon Galt, and you're listening to ASHI's Coffee and Compatibility.
Okay, so, dear audience, dear listeners, you have an amazing panel of people here today. Normally, Eric and Jeremy and I just try to address the questions that you have, but today you've got a whole panel of expert people and some really controversial topics discussed. So now is your time. We invite you to come to the microphone and shoot some questions to your podcast host, to your guest experts. And this can be about anything. It can be about what concerns you about OPTN modernization in the United States. That's a big deal recently, right? What concerns you about these FDA legislations? What concerns you about CMS and CLIA? And I am so excited to see that the very first question is coming from your ASHI president, official as of yesterday, the Kathy Murphy.
Oh, thank you so much. So my question is for Annette, because I think that we have more work to do in the realm of what we've done in the past. And I was just wondering if you had any insight to think of how the LDTs may go now that the lawsuits have been brought against the FDA, and do you think that there's a possibility of us losing our exemption because of the lawsuits if it gets turfed off to the legislative branch, and would it bring back ballot?
I think this is a pause. I think our exemption is a pause, and I think we need to take this pause to get ready. I do not think, even if the final rule stays, we have this exemption. That doesn't mean that in 2 years they're not going to remove that exemption, right? And if the final rule does get paused too long in litigation, Congress looks as though they're going to bring up a valid 2.0. So I guess I wasn't super clear in the Directors Affairs Committee, but oversight is coming. And so it's being prepared. And I would love if some of you have been in conversation with your pathology departments who may have leadership in CAP, who may be married to someone on the FDA, whatever your source, you can keep it anonymous, but insights for what they see and what they want to see. Because the more information we have collectively in how pathology departments are preparing, we need to share those, because Kathy Murphy, for instance, is not part of a large academic institution. So we really need to find out how people are preparing, what should we be doing so that we can share it with others from smaller institutions.
So I actually, really quick, I'm going to take host privilege and just really quick kind of interject in that. So years ago, when we were really hotly in the throes of talking about Valadect on the NCAC, Dr. Hildebrand said something I thought is very interesting. ASHI should really start talking directly to and making friends with the FDA. So do our panelists feel like it is now, and maybe it is yesterday, a year ago, that ASHI should be proving to the FDA that we are the ones that the FDA should go to when there is oversight for that expertise to actually help exert that oversight, to be the ones that gauge whether or not, the FDA approval materials are valid.
So before they answer, by a show of hands of everyone who just heard what Kelly said, what do we think? Should we be having direct conversations with our counterparts at the FDA and starting to put faces together? Who says yes? Okay, good. I like you all even better now. Please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, short answer, absolutely. As I mentioned before, I don't think the FDA has the expertise to really provide the oversight that histocompatibility needs. And we already have the oversight, right? Like, ASHI is deemed status by CMS. We already follow all of these regulations. I think it's very dangerous if the FDA does not have anybody, to consult with that is the expert in histocompatibility.
Well, I mean, you brought it up. The perfect opportunity is we need someone to marry someone within the FDA. That's the influence.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the influence we
Out
need.
there.
Yeah.
Single gentleman.
We need a mole. We need a mole.
You could serve ASHI in this capacity.
I have to say, the FDA was not very chatty with us. Like, we have tried to, and I think that's because the final rule was, they were formulating it, and they didn't want to talk to anybody. Now that the final rule is there, I think now is the time that we start really chatting with the FDA and trying to understand their perspective. We have to understand their perspective.
Yeah,
and not to be political or put it on a party, but as you said, apparently kudos to the White House, because the FDA was going to go full in, but because you were on a call with the White House.
With Kathy Murphy.
With Kathy Murphy, thank you both. The White House was actually, am I wrong about that? The party that said, oh, this is pretty complicated, we should probably leave this alone.
It's my impression that the White House was responsible for our carve-out, because we brought up key points that the cross-match is most highly utilized in highly sensitized patients, is where we still rely on it, and that serves underrepresented minorities and women, and our fear of too much regulatory burden and cost with the FDA oversight may close small transplant centers, which are in areas of underserved populations. We brought up all of the things that we were fearful of, and I think because we hit on these political points that were important for the Biden administration because of the guidance from Wheaton Schroyer. And so I believe, it's my thinking, and I think Kathy's nodding, that it was the White House that gave us this exemption, not the FDA. The FDA doesn't like exemptions. And so I do not think it's going to hold. So I think we need to get ready. And I think, again, I would love to hear what you guys are hearing in your centers, because the more knowledge is better.
Well, I'm Charlie Lutz from the University of Kentucky, and I'm happily married, so I'm not one of the candidates. Thank you for your work on these legislative issues. As scientifically trained people, at least I will speak for myself, I just hate regulation and hate thinking about rules and all that. So I'm so glad you are doing that. So you mentioned the Valid Act 2.0. Is there any indication that that is something that ASHI would get behind and support, or is it just way too early to know that?
I think it's too early, and right now we're pausing and not rushing in, because with the final rule, we do have a carve-out. We do have that pause. If a Valid Act would go in, things could move very quickly. So we are kind of being silent and seeing how this plays out. So we're being silent politically, but I do not think we should be silent as a society. I think we need to be talking and put out plans and be talking beside. There's a lot of, I've learned, there's a lot of back table chitter chatter that big institutions that have people at the CAP leadership have like these inroads into FDA. And ASHI doesn't have that, right? Now, Wheaton Troyer brings us a lot of knowledge, but we actually need to talk to our colleagues and try to get access to that.
Yeah, I'll just make one final comment. As somebody associated with also with the genomics lab, we have a number of tests that we carry out in an FDA-approved fashion, except that often includes a particular DNA extraction instrument. And to fully comply, we'd have to have 4 or 5 or 6 DNA extraction instruments in the lab, because that's the way those were validated when they were approved by the FDA. It's crazy, but that would be what would be required.
So Charlie, actually, I love it that you said that, and thank you so much for asking this question. I actually have a question for you based on what you said about that. So how is your laboratory, from that perspective, preparing for these changes? Are you waiting for these lawsuits to flesh themselves out?
We are waiting, but we are fully prepared to jettison a bunch of our testing. Our institution tends to be very lawyer shy, and we are, for instance, under the current rules, we are prepared to just drop our disease-associated HLA testing, for example, because that's not directly transplant-related. Even though it's much simpler than the transplant-related testing, our interpretation is that that is not directly transplant-related, and therefore we would have to drop it unless there was some FDA-approved alternative test that we could purchase. So I think, just like everybody here, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concern, and not knowing what's going to come down and not knowing what might get interrupted and turned around. It's really up in the air, but we are operationally planning that the FDA rules would go into effect. I will take back your comments about thinking that our exemption by the FDA might be temporary, and even our transplant-related HLA testing might come under these rules. And after that, I have no idea how we're going to operate.
Question.
Thank you, Charlie.
You know, it's a lot like duck, right? Like on the surface, it seems like nothing's really happening, right? But like behind the scenes, we're all like kicking super hard.
So,
Madam President.
I want to segue into my other favorite subject, which is also ABOs. You know, like Ann, very ABO histocompatibility driven. As you probably may or may not know, I am very, very, very genotype driven for ABOs. And to Ann's point, and the point that we tried to make in the session the other day, that transfusion medicine is not the same thing as transplantation, and currently transfusion medicine is driving all our regulatory requirements for transplantation. So my question to the panel and the larger audience abroad is, how do we push this forward to show that ABO histocompatibility should be a different from transfusion medicine and should have its own regulations and establish its own guidelines to allow genotyping to be the adjudicator for ABO systems in transplantation?
And genotyping by certain methods, right? Because even in transfusion, if you're making that parallel, isn't it correct that the only HLA typing modality FDA approved for transfusion support is
Yeah, right. But for ABO, I don't think that there's just no guidelines written for it. The way it stands right now is that you have to do serology, which we do, but we do, of course, the ABO, and we do it by RT-PCR and NGS. But when we report out both methods, but we tell our OPO to use the molecular to upload into unit.
So important, though, because I think, like in the transfusion side, we've gotten stuck where we have one assay. I think SSO is approved for typing for transfusion support, right? So we're stuck where we can do all this fancy, beautiful genotyping with all kinds of sequencing modalities, but we can't apply it to that because it's not
But we
FDA
still have a
approved.
science gap there, though. I mean, that's the problem. And I think the way to address this is to bring the science. The database has to be a thing. I think we just, obviously we need to work with our transfusion medicine colleagues, but this 2017 PDF table for our, sequence, it's not a sequence, we can't call it that. We need IMGT ABO. We just need that. This is a huge barrier right now. And until we do that and we work together like we have done to do every other HLA flavored, NCure and all the other things, that we do it as a community, we do it together and we figure it out, because it is more complicated in some ways with ABO, because we need to understand what the glycosyl transferases and fucosyl transferases are doing in the tissue. So if you have a rare typing, like there was a great abstract presentation by Dr. Kathy Gebhardt about, looking at the serology versus and then we're using red cells to confirm all of these typings, knowing full well they are not a surrogate for the ABO and H glycans that are on the organs for transplanting. So we need flow cytometry studies, we need immunohistochemistry studies, we need good monoclonals, and that's a problem too, as we know from HLA, those same problems. It's the exact same things. We just need to replicate what we've done for HLA, for ABO, and I think work with our transfusion medicine colleagues, but acknowledge that their need is not the same. The motivation is not the same. And I think that this is where we need to work together and apply all the things, just do exactly what we did, but for ABO.
And I think I was short to mention that we also need to work with our vendor colleagues, because they also have a lot of expertise in regulatory, and we can learn a lot from them and guidance from them. And I would actually ask our current president that perhaps you should talk to Bob Bray about creating a CLIAC group to look at ABO and, get the evidence together. That's a direct interaction with the CMS, and I think that might be a way to move ABO forward.
Back to the federal government again.
And if anyone has any weird and wonderful ABO genotypings, phenotypings, please send me your samples.
That's funny. Please.
I'm Mary Dibney from Melbourne in Australia. And in Australia, we've been regulated by our equivalent to the FDA called TGA. We've got lots of similar but different acronyms since, I think it's 2017, 2018. It has definitely clipped our wings in terms of developing, we call them in-house IVDs, laboratory developed tests. I learned a new acronym today. And when a company has an IVD marking on their kit, they still have to register it with our equivalent of the FDA, which costs them money, and it definitely has stopped some vendors from coming into Australia and selling in our market. However, we've still succeeded, so we had a 3-year leeway, and tests in Australia are classed in different numbers. So ABO is classed higher than tissue typing. So HLA typing has a lower class as an IVD or an in vitro diagnostic. So we have some allowances around the validations that we do. They've given to our equivalent of CLIA the authority to regulate the tests for HLA because it's a lower classed IVD. So if you're preparing and you're saying this is going to come for you, I'd say look at the way Australia has done it and take some guidance from that in how you might approach your authorities in managing what happens for you.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Okay, my name is Apiwati Apan from Northwestern Laboratory, and I have one question. So I have been checking the FDA approved status of our assay in our lab, and one of the NGS vendor for HCL Halpin, he said that the assay is not FDA clearance or approved, but it was ASHI exempt. Yeah, so I want to ask you about to elaborate about the ASHI exempt and and its effect on the verification and validation. That whether we need to do verification on validation.
So, an external review of validation. So, if you take on a new platform, is that? That's what.
I think the question is about, so NGS was one of the examples. So is the question, am I understanding correctly, that you're wondering if you bring a new NGS modality, for example, into your laboratory as of this moment based on the current FDA regulations, do you need to do anything additional other than perform a validation and submit that validation to ASHI and be inspected on that validation? Is that your question?
It's the assay. The vendor said it's already ASHI exempt, but not FDA clearance, not FDA approved. So I wonder if we need to do the validation on that assay because it's not FDA approved, but we just need to do verification. Just that.
So I would say you certainly need to perform a validation on every single new methodology in your laboratory, no matter what, right? And be prepared to, so some of the validations, if they're kind of similar to modalities you're already using in the laboratory. For instance, I think a good example is if you're using like a hybrid capture NGS and you start using nanopore. You might not need to submit that validation to ASHI, but you will be needing to be prepared to show that validation to your ASHI inspector, right? Because they're going to ask about it for sure. Do you need to submit that to the FDA at this moment? At this moment, no. If that testing is applied to transfusion support for solid organ transplant or hematopoietic stem cell transplant. But I think the point that Dr. Jackson has eloquently made is that might not be true forever.
Awesome. Thank you very much for you guys joining us today. Appreciate it. For all the questions and having the three of you, thank you again very much for your time.
And thank you to our audience.
Yes.
Thank you guys.